As we all know, Nigeria is faced with a lot of unique challenges, but that presents a lot of opportunities for innovation and transformation, especially within the public sector service delivery. By show of hands, how many of us here know what a memo is? Memo? Okay. How many people know what memos mean within the public sector? Anyone? Okay. Some of us, we have a lot of public sector people in the room. A memo essentially is a brief or a report to pass some information or to make a request, at least as it's used within the public sector. The way it goes is that when you want to request for an approval, you want to request for something to get done, you write a memo and put it in a file, similar to your jacket. There's a popular saying within the public sector that nothing gets done until a file moves. What that simply means is that for everything you want to get done, some way, somehow, a memo is being written, or some documents are being written and put within a file, and then it goes from each stage to the next stage for approvals, for requests, for review, and whatever. To fix a broken pipe in the government house, how many times do you think a file needs to move? Any suggestions? Anyone? Any guesses? Sometimes how many? 3 times, 10 times. You're close. Thank you very much. We'll find out very soon. Over the past 10 years, I've had the opportunity of working with organizations across the globe looking to digitize or transform their operations. In recent years, a lot of those have been spent working with government at various levels, the federal government, state government, ministries, departments, and agencies that are looking to adopt innovative ways to transform their operations. We've had the opportunity of working with government to transform various processes such as automation of approval workflows, expenditure management, procurement management, and a host of others. A few months ago, I had the opportunity of talking to a very senior public official. And she was just explaining to me while we were talking about the need to digitize the approval process within the state government. And she gave an example that I believe exemplifies what it takes to get anything done within the public sector. And here's what happened. She discovered a broken pipe within the office, and she needed the broken pipe fixed. As you may be aware, within the public sector or within the government, for everything you want to get done, there is a ministry, a department, or an agency that is responsible for such. And within each department, ministry, or agency, there are different processes that have been laid out for any of these things to get done. As you may not also be aware, within every MDA, ministry, department, and agencies, there are set out processes for things to move. Take, for instance, you want to make a request for whatever you want to make a request for. There's a process that it must go from some personnel within a department through the director or head of the department to the permanent secretary of the MDA and ultimately through the supervising officer. Interestingly, once that request or approval is given, that same file or memo must come down through the same channel. So which means after the approval has been given, the supervising officer hands it down to the permanent secretary and back to the director and back to the personnel that needs to do this. And let's go back to the scenario we're painting. There's a leaking pipe that needs to get fixed. After the personnel took the instruction, the first step is to, of course, engage the Ministry of Works, in this case, who will be responsible for fixing the pipe. And that's where the story gets interesting. The first step is to actually get an approval to engage the Ministry of Works. A memo is written, it's passed to the head of the department, passed to the permanent secretary, and passed to the commissioner for approval. Once that approval is given, the memo comes back the same way to the personnel that initiated the request. That is 6 movements of the file, just to get the approval to write another memo to the Ministry of Work for the actual work to be done. And of course, when the second memo is written, you expect the same process, so it goes the way up. And interestingly, within the public sector, every memo that comes into an MDA comes in from the top, which simply means even though the personnel that will action this memo is within a department, that memo comes in through the commissioner or the permanent secretary within the MDA. And so it is minuted down all the way to the personnel, and you go on and on. I believe we can all see what the challenge is with that kind of process. As you would imagine, that process could have been simplified by a simple policy change and implementation of an email service. Now, to answer the first question, if you look at what it will take to then get this pipe fixed, there's the first approval to write a request, there's the request itself, there's the alignment on time for investigation and inspection of the leaking pipe, there's the reporting on what was found out after the investigation, there's the request for funds, there's the approval for funds, and ultimately there's the execution of the task. 6 different processes, each having 6 steps of file movement. And sometimes there may be mistakes and you go on and on. So the short answer is you can have up to 30 to 50 file movements just to get a pipe in the government's house fixed. How much more for the ordinary citizens? Nigeria today is projected to go to a population of about 380 million people by 2050. Today, it takes about 4 to 6 months to get an international passport, about 3 to 4 months to get a driver's license, and it can take up to 10 to 12 years for a civil court case to be resolved in Nigeria. That is 3,650 days. And that is Nigeria with a population of 200 million people. Now, imagine what happens when we reach the population of 380 million by 2050. It simply means our current approach to handling things cannot sustain what is required. The ambition of every government is to innovate, digitize, and be nimble. The risks and challenges, however, faced by government is similar to what you find in any large traditional private sector organization that has existed for a while. To the left, you have what currently obtains within those traditional organizations. Operations dictated by legacy systems, processes that are built based on paper era, and so on and so forth. And to the right, you have where they want to be. The challenge then is, what does the government need to do to move from where we are to where we need to be? The response is not to create a digital government overnight, but to articulate step-by-step process that is focused around people, around processes, and around the technologies that support those processes. Here, I have just a brief highlight of what are the different levels of government digitization. And if you look at that, you will find that within Nigeria today, we're essentially between level 1 and level 2. A lot of our processes are manual. Some MDAs, some ministries, departments, and agencies have managed to digitize and automate some of their processes. But there's still a lot of work to be done. The question then is, what are these challenges that are hindering us from getting to where we really need? Some of them include things like lack of funds or budgetary restrictions. Other very prominent, interesting one includes special interest, where someone just wants to ensure that that file passes through them simply because that is how they make their daily bread, or we call it bribes. Other examples include lack of technical skills and expertise, lack of motivation within the workforce for obvious reasons, as well as lack of modern tools such as computers, electricity, and good internet service. I remember very recently we were engaged by one of the state governments to help with the digitization of one of their processes. Like we always do, we put together a team of people, sent them to go have relevant engagement within these people that are impacted by these processes. Came up with fantastic ideas. How should this process run? Cut off all the necessary processes and implemented a system. The day of the training came. We're quite excited to be launching or to be training the users of this system on the use of the system. And one of them asked a very simple question. How do I connect to the internet? And that essentially shows the level of workforce or the skills within the workforce within the public sector. The question we must then ask is not only what technologies do we need to put in place, but also what are the other things that must be in place for innovation, for digitization to thrive within the public sector. And for me, that is where we need to start from. We heard different things from different governments around digitization of processes. We talk about the example of Estonia, where they've managed to practically digitize all their processes. But we must realize our reality in ensuring that, or in realizing that there are foundational elements that must be resolved. There are questions that must be answered before we can then leapfrog into where we need to be. The government over the past couple of years have done a lot of work in digitizing several processes, and a very good example is the digitization of the tax system within the country, or the ongoing digitization of the tax system within the country. But there's still a lot of work to be done. Once we address these basic requirements, we can then begin to explore innovative ways to respond to the different challenges that faces the country, especially from the perspective of processes within the public sector, which ultimately impact public sector service delivery. Some of the things that can be considered includes Internet of Things, which can be adopted for transportation management to then ensure that within the country, places like Lagos will reduce traffic. Things like monitoring agricultural produce to ensure that we can increase our agricultural production. Other things that can be considered include blockchain, which will help us with digital identity and ultimately may help us increase transparency within the government, as well as reduce or prevent fraud within the system. And a key one that is important is artificial intelligence and machine learning. By analyzing big demographic data, by analyzing economic data, we are able to present opportunities or identify opportunities by identifying trends and patterns that can then be used for resource allocation, budgetary allocation, as well as improve the lives of the citizens. According to the multidimensional poverty index of 2022 in Nigeria, about 5 of 10 people, that's about 50% of the people in Nigeria, live at least 30 minutes away from the nearest functioning health facility on foot. Imagine a world where we can use artificial intelligence to address that need, where you don't need to leave the comfort of your home to access health services. While we're innovating around this, we must not forget that inclusion of citizens in the process of delivering this innovation is essential. And that is what enables us to ensure that when these services or when these innovations are delivered, they deliver on what the citizens need. And finally, we must bear in mind the role of the leaders. They must understand what currently exists within the organization or within the different levels of organization or within the different levels of government that they supervise. And it's until they have that in-depth understanding that they can then begin to understand how technology can come in and how they can build relevant enabling environments that enables innovation to thrive. By way of conclusion, I would like to challenge you today to be agents of change, to innovate within your spheres of influence, to work together collectively, to build the public sector service delivery that delivers immense value to the citizens. Together, let's reimagine a public sector service that is efficient, citizen-centric, and is driven by innovation and technology. Thank you.